Welcome back, everybody. Hope you all had a nice little break there. So welcome to the last session on the second day. We're going to have a quick look at the editor tool again and give you a chance to kind of play around with it. Elise, are you there? Could you make me allow me to do the screen sharing? Right. So I'm going to cross my fingers and hope that the tech issues of yesterday don't reappear suddenly. So the address to get to the tool is editor-workshop.is.ed.ac.uk. One of my colleagues will paste that in the Slack chat, in the Zoom chat for me, because I have lost the chat window with the screen sharing. But basically, when you arrive, you'll get a little homepage, and you can click the button to create account. Just to stay right off at the top, that this is just a copy of the live data, so nothing beyond this workshop will be kept. Don't worry about your emails or passwords or anything like that. It's just a temporary system to give a demonstration. Likewise with the data, don't worry about any data you change or things you alter, because it's just a copy for you to play around with. But anyway, once you've registered, you'll be able to log into the site. Keep the fingers crossed. And so what happens now is you'll get a list of the volumes of the available pages. As you can see, it's pretty big, and it's split by the session papers held by Edinburgh University, the ones in the Signet Library, the Advocates Library, and the University of Virginia collection. And there's a little bit of data on each one. But really the bit that's kind of interesting to play around with is the workflow for correcting the transcriptions, looking at things. So under your login, you'll have a thing here that says next, and it's got a big link. This will take you to a random page within the collection to play around with. So this is a nice way of just kind of diving in somewhere. So if we click it, you'll see it loads up the interface. We've got here on the right-hand side the deep zoomable image, so you can kind of look at that. You can zoom in and out, move around it, and we have the list of things you can do with the page. So the document title, document date. You can add some notes if there's some problems or some marginalia, and the big list of entities. So these are all the things that have been found here. So you can see Drummond is probably this guy here, J. Drummond. So you might even say that he is. You can click through. He's the agent for the respondent, and you can add a note. So do something experiment like this: J.A. Drummond. And this is just the kind of thing you can play around with. If you look at the one page, you can experiment with tagging the entities. You can add some new entities if they've not been detected. Yeah, and if you want to kind of move around, you can press the random page button at the top to just go to a different part of the collection, or you can browse through the volumes in order by clicking the previous and next. So that's just it's a kind of very quick overview. I hope that the interface is intuitive and easy to use. So at this point, what I do is I just invite you to sort of go onto the site, start playing around. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'll be here if you have questions. If you want to sort of ask about what's going on, if you have some problems, please just put them in the Slack, in the Zoom chat. I'll be around to answer, but it's just some time for you really to kind of have a play around and see what it's like to actually use the tool. So yeah, I'll just kind of have a sort of wait there. Please, if there's any other questions about the technology or other things that I can sort of talk to you about while you're playing around with the tool, please just again put the questions in the chat. I'm here, you know, just happy to help and see what we can make happen. And probably the last thing to say, if you do get an error message or something goes wrong, please don't panic. This is still a work in progress. It's still software under development. Occasionally things go wrong. Your best bet, just click back, maybe try a different page or some other thing. I'll be keeping an eye on the server just to make sure nothing goes horribly wrong. But yeah, so So thank you. Ben has asked a very good question there about, is there a vocabulary to be used for notes available on the site? So we don't actually have that on the site at the moment. Evie started to produce a kind of vocabulary for us to use, but the idea behind the note section is that it's free-form text, specifically so that individual projects can use it for their own, whatever extra data they need to add without being constrained or told, you can add this data or this data, but not this data. So it's for each kind of project to set their own standards for what they want in there. So we have some conventions with some conventions, for example, with how just putting spelling or putting role, or if the same person crops up twice, we have same as, and then the number, their entity number. And so the idea with that is that then project specifically at the end of the data collection process, you can process those notes programmatically however you want to make whatever modifications to the data you want or not. There's a few other questions here. Let's have a look. Resolution, click on document image. What's over here? If the name of the defendant isn't in the list, can it be added somehow? It does find the name of the text towards the bottom. Yeah, so Sarah, at the bottom you have the entities list. You have a section for new where you can add in a new entity and give them the thing, and you can add the note to say this was at the top of the document. The ability to mark those areas in the document is on the feature list, but it's not yet here. Kyle Roberts. Now on a page, I want to find a word in the left column, digital surrogate. Yes, Kyle, unfortunately at the minute you just have to locate it on the page. I am working on making it so you can click on the entities and have the page focus, but that's still a feature under development. So again, just to stress, this is still a kind of working tool. As it's far from what I imagine the finished version to be, but I hope that it gives you a nice insight into where we're going and what's possible. Right, what do we have here? Alexandra Hill. There is a page contains marginalia button. So this is marked against the individual page within inside the document. But again, the data in the back end can be exported in any format. So if you wanted to highlight, for example, only the volumes where the marginalia occurs in the first page of a case, or if there's marginalia kind of midway through a document, you would be able to extract that and export that data however you wanted. But in terms of the data model, it's stored against the single page object, which is what drives the kind of interface. Christine, if you're adding an entity that wasn't picked up by the software, is the way to connect to the image. So yeah, as I mentioned before, that is a feature that is in the pipeline for future development. Stringent Gary, how easily customizable are the drop downs? It's a very good question. Completely customizable, as Evie will tell you. When she wanted something new adding, it was a case of just me adding a row to the database to create it. In terms of adding extra columns, the data model is designed to be extensible. So yes, you could associate additional metadata with every entity other than just the role. So for the data we're collecting for the court of session papers, the role of the person found or the place is what we're most interested in for this particular project. But if you have other projects where you're interested in extracting different parts of data associated with the entity matches, then yes, you can add those as new fields to the data model to be collected. An option to correct the transcription in line rather than retyping it in full might be helpful. Yes, indeed, Fergus. Again, that's something that I have on my list of quality of life improvements for the people using the tool. So thank you. Yeah, a couple of people have mentioned that to me, so it's definitely there. Right, so very exciting. Evie has very kindly posted her notes convention into the chat there. So if you're interested in seeing what's been done so far, you can click that and have a look. Darren, are these flags aggregated somewhere, otherwise shunted to curators for their attention? By flags, do you mean things like this page has marginalia, this page has problems? Or do you mean the tags on the entities themselves? That, or the actual corrections. So at the minute, the data is just exported at the end as is. So we can indeed kind of pass all the notes and the corrections back to the curators. In terms of from transcriptions, because we don't have a gold transcription of the data, since it comes only from OCR, there's no human transcription. There's no human transcription of these documents. So this goes towards generating our gold copy, because any corrections noted here feed back into the OCR transcription, and they then are also used to train the model to improve the quality of the transcriptions when we run it across further digitized parts of the corpus. Right, what do we have here? Will we be showing everybody the WIF tool as well? Yes, once I've got through answering a bunch of questions, maybe around the hour, we can have a look at that. What role is a printing firm that contains a person's name? That is a good question. We don't actually currently have something in there for marking companies. So at the minute, I would probably mark it as other.
Just to jump in there, Mike.
Yeah.
Sorry. From my own personal experience of using the tool, I always mark them as a printer, because I'm pretty sure I sneaked that one in there in my feature request. So yeah, I would mark that one as printer.
Perfect, thank you. So this is the value of kind of working cross team, and not just it being the developers in one silo and the people using the tool in another silo. So I'm good. I'm very happy. It was nice because when I first built it, I think I only had 3 or 4 things in the roles box. I had the complainant, the defender, the judge, and other. So everything else you see there is things that Evie has requested me to add throughout the development. I'm on the page, Joe Knuckles, I'm on a page where editor has picked up the document date as an entity under other. Would this be ignored or entered instead under? So you could tag the entity itself as a date, Joe, which would allow us then to improve the model for detecting dates in future passes, and you could also enter it into the document date field. The hope is that with enough of the training data, with enough of the model set, that the document date extraction will become more automatic. At the minute, because I can't be certain which date appears is the correct one for the document. So for example, I have a case on my screen now, which is dated January the 3rd, but the text starts 6th of December the year before. We're not currently extracting the document date. That's something we hope to build up with the model in the future. Andrew Watson, in the page is identified text I can't find and not the initial key names. Yeah, so Andrew, if you tag those things that are problems as not an entity in the selection box, the next time I reload the data, those will disappear from the list. So that's effectively the delete option. But because obviously we don't want to actually remove the data, we just want to flag it to say this was incorrect and shouldn't appear. Because even data about what's incorrect is useful to us, because we can, as well as feeding the correct transcriptions and the correct classifications back to the model, we can also give it the things it got wrong and say, hey, look, you got this wrong. Don't do that next time. So we don't ever actually delete the data that's come out, but when we tag it as not an entity, we can use that to actually improve things again in the future. Gary Stringer, thanks. Which tools are you using to detect the entities? So at the minute, I'm using the Python Spacey library, the most recent version, which is a few changes to how the model works. And it's currently just trained on the largest English data set that they have as the default data sets, plus some of the transcription and tagging that we did beforehand. So on top of that, I've built some custom pipeline components for the Spacey language processing in order to do things like maintain the connection to the images, to be able to understand that there are different types of entities. So when you find a person, that has a subcategory, which would be the person's role. Fergus, the page I'm currently looking at correctly identifies Glasgow and Edinburgh as places. How does it do that? Does it carry out a look up in a gazetteer? It doesn't actually look things up in a gazetteer at this stage. So that is just the English language model for Spacey in its default configuration, has been trained on data sets that include place names tagged as places. Or usually in natural language processing, you refer to them as geopolitical entities. So the data set that we started from when we first feed the text in already understands that these things are places. We have a further data visualization down the line, which is using a gazetteer to do georeferencing on identified places. So that will then do the kind of things like produce the visualization of the map. So we can show, here's this volume, here are all of the places that are referred to in this volume. I noticed this doesn't seem to pick up all caps as well as the others. Yes, the all caps thing is a problem I'm still struggling with the OCR transcriptions. The biggest problem with a collection like this is the variety of formatting and layouts, given that it spans several hundred years worth of printing. So there are some things which the OCR engine, when it's making the initial transcription of the text, does struggle with. So I mentioned in my talk yesterday about the long S character, and I'm sure that as you browse around, some of you will have already come across things where that is still rendered incorrectly. But as with all these things, each time we run it, we have more data which improves how it works. So yes, when we have the time and resource to do another OCR run, part of the new training data will be focusing on the variances in formatting and providing the engine with examples of the small caps and some of the variances we've detected across the corpus in order to improve the quality of the OCR transcriptions. So it's all this kind of big recycling pipeline. Yes, you can indeed edit a note. Once you've added the note, next to it should appear two little icons, one a pencil and paper, and one a little bin. So you can either edit or delete the note with those two things. If that feature is not, when you click on edit, you should get a little pop-up box on your screen allowing you to edit the note. If that doesn't appear, it's possibly a JavaScript issue. I can look into it. How we cope with duplicate place names. Yes, so duplicate place names is an interesting one, as is duplicate people's names. At the minute, Evie has been tagging entities with a note that says same as, and she's just put that in the chat. So I'll be taking that data and using it to do some merging, kind of where we can say, yes, a person has looked at this, therefore we know that it's okay to merge this data. In terms of automatic merging of data, until we have a bigger data set, I'm hesitant of doing any kind of automatic merging for fear that it might not be accurate enough yet. But when we run things through a gazetteer and other geographical things down the line, I think that some of these problems will be resolved by application of sort of further techniques, and that we can put the data out and we say, you know, we know that we haven't amalgamated every single instance of Glasgow into one entity, but we've done as much as we can, you know, and like we've been talking about all day with this sort of iterative approach to the data, then we can come back later. You know, someone might come in 6 months later and say, hey, I found this reference to Glasgow here. This should be included with the collection of references to Glasgow. And we can then add that and sort of iterate the data set to make it better. Okay, have a quick look in the Slack channel. Thank you, Ianthe and Evie, for catching the questions there. Interesting issue on page 191. There are two identified entities, both listed as places, Firth and Clyde. Obviously, the entity is Firth and Clyde. So in this instance, Darren, this is the sort of thing where I would turn back to the curating team and to Evie and say, how do we deal with this when it happens in normal transcription work, or what happens to you know, these entities where we need to set them, and we would build something into the system. So this is the sort of example where our development feedback loop between the developers and the users of the tool that I think Fergus asked about earlier comes into play. So that's something that's not currently dealt with by the tool, but it's certainly something we could deal with either by having a new notes convention, which allows us to combine entities so that then we can programmatically recombine things based on the notes, or to add a mechanism for actually combining the entities in the interface.
Yeah, with those split entities, I've come across it a few times, and to try and keep things as simple as possible, if in your example there is one place that's been split into two, I would tag them both as places, but then I would add another entity that has the full name, tag it as a place, and then also tag it as same as, and the entity numbers of the two original split ones, just before we make any decisions about like what Mike was saying.
Yeah, but so that's the perfect example of where the free-form notes field allows these conventions to emerge as you are going through the data set, because as has been mentioned in a couple of the panels and some of the discussions, you can't always know with data sets of this scale all of the things you might encounter before you encounter them. So allowing for this kind of emerging conventions as the data is processed is really important. Stringer Gary, could you use a notes convention to tag to the authority list such as via geonames? Yes, and in fact that is another thing that is on the features list. and was mentioned in my my talk yesterday in my slides for what we would like to do in the future. I'm very interested in building lookups to existing authority records, because this enables us to do the merging in a sort of concrete way where we're referencing existing authorities, but also it makes the final data we output that much richer, because we're able to publish it with all of these authority links, which then means that if there are people who are doing programmatic analysis, or who want to build their own interfaces for diving into the collection, they have rich linked data available to them, which makes this really easy. So yeah, that's definitely something that we're interested in adding as a sort of primary feature of the tool. There's no reason why in the current form you couldn't do it in the notes field, but yes, that's something we're actually looking to add to the main thing. So there's a question popped up for Evie there from Andrew. Would you do the same sort of process for something like etc. Alex Duncan?
That's interesting. I would just correct the spelling if it had misspelled the entity in that situation. I would assign it a name, role, or defender or complainant if that was relevant. But I wouldn't get too bogged down in the etceteras.
Oh, thanks. Right, there's a couple of other questions here. Let me see here. From Charleston Library Society, do you recommend correcting language as garbled if it's not important, meaning it's not an entity? So this can be a kind of project decision about where your priorities lie. Data that is garbled but not an entity can still be important to correct if you are planning to rerun the OCR process, because correcting the transcription of the characters the OCR engine is generating, even if those characters are actually meaningless in the context, can still be fed back to tell the engine, here is some training data, here is an actual transcription of the characters in this part of the image. So it's kind of an optional thing depending on the requirements of the project. Certainly, I think for our case here, it's useful to have, because we are planning to run the OCR process again in the future when we have a better model. Because as some of you have probably come across using the tool, there are some pages where the output is just garbage. And with a collection of this size, there's not much we can do about that until we have the data to train the model better. Because there's such a variety over the collection that the generalized model you get to start with will not handle some of the cases. Carry on, please. What is the format of the final output? Does it adhere to any particular cataloging standard, or can it be mapped to one? So the data final data output can be in any format you want. At the moment, I'm publishing IIIF annotations, but as mentioned yesterday, we'll build in the ability to spit out things like DC, but also because we're storing the data kind of specific for each project, it will be extensible to put in a crosswalk at the end for whatever output format you would like. So for example, if you wanted to take this, if we had the authority records and you wanted to take this and map it back to MARC data, for example, we would look to make that a possibility. If you want to produce TEI of the pages with the text and the markup all kind of in a nice TEI file, we would look to support that and bring these things in. Let's have a look here. Right. Okay. Multiple places with the same name. No, I have not considered how we might tackle that. I'm afraid, Fergus, that is definitely a problem for the people with curatorial knowledge of the data, and not for a code monkey. so I pass the kind of responsibility buck on that one to Elise and Rachel and Norman and Jim and those guys to decide what happens there. I'd be very interested to see how editor handles incunabula with symbols of abbreviations, multiple text layout. Badly, I would say, because it's not hugely designed for that. It's mostly a tool designed for these kind of large text-heavy corpuses where you've got things like the session papers, just pages and pages of text. You know, there's maybe some variations in layout, but there's not the kind of manuscript element that you might find with kind of very peculiar printing. But that is definitely something I would be interested in investigating in the future with other collections, how we might feasibly handle automated work with materials in that format, because certainly they exist a lot in collections, and there are not kind of the tools around yet to really work with them in the same way. It's a much harder computational challenge to solve.
Francis, could you maybe expand on that? Sometimes when I've had that happen, it is still picked up the entity as one go, as one entity, sorry. So I just treat it as a normal one, but has it done something funny in the entity table? Okay, so in that case, Francis, if it's only showing one half the name, I would make sure the spelling's correct, give it the correct role, and then I would add another entity that has where you enter the full name, and again enter the role as you did with the original one. And in the notes conventions, I would simply type same as colon hashtag and the number of where the original entity was found.
Let's have a look here. How have you handled occupations that appear in these legal documents? On one page, editor has pulled taxman as an entity, and the other it did not. So I would say we're definitely interested in tagging people's occupations. In fact, we probably have a case to be made for adding occupation as a class of entity that can be tagged. Again, because this is kind of just an in-progress curatorial work in collaboration with the team from the CRC and EV, we don't always have every type of entity, but again, it's for the individual projects can kind of decide what is important for the data they pull out. We try not to be prescriptivist in saying what you can and can't have in the entity column, but rather just providing the tool that can adapt to the specific requirements of the collection you're trying to process with it. In terms of it picking up the same text as an entity in one place and another, unfortunately, that's just a vagary of the model. And with training data and time, that will improve. The kind of biggest thing with this is that building a data set using this tool allows us to improve in the future, because these data sets, as has been mentioned many times, will never be perfect at the start. They require the expertise and curatorial input of people with knowledge of the collections in order to have the full potential of what you can do with automated transcription, with machine learning, with AI. You know, it's no good just giving the computer a collection and saying, okay, go away and do something with it. You have to sort of set the parameters of what data is useful to extract. You know, if we theoretically were to have a person read these 6 million pages, what data would we want them to note down from each page? and then you build the tool so that it can do that. So let's see if we have any other things here. Format of the paper's layout does vary, it struggles. This was in relation to Christine. Okay. That's already. How does it handle non-Latin scripts such as Greek, Hebrew, or Arabic? So the tool in itself doesn't. It's not language specific because it's fed entirely off the OCR transcription data that's generated. You could do that for any language. If you have an OCR model for Greek or for Hebrew or for Arabic, for which they exist already many good models for these languages, and especially stuff like Arabic or other scripts where you might find right to left writing or top to bottom writing or lines that don't fit the format that you might associate with native English data. If you can produce an OCR transcription of those, you can feed it into the editor tool and perform the same work, the same process. And again, the OCR step we have integrated, but the tool itself just wants the OCR output to start with. So you're not tied into using the OCR system we use here. You know, if you have institutionally something like a lot of places use Abbey, it can take the data output from that and work with that. When I was working with a team, want to check on people's work, is there an administrative view where you can see, compare the activity? So that sort of feature is something we would probably look to build in at some point. All the activity is recorded and logged, so if you've made some changes, you'll see in the title bar at the top, you have a tab called My Actions. So if you click on that, it will show you a list of everything you've done. So building that out for administrators is definitely something that's feasible. During the initial development of the tool, the kind of primary focus has been on the core functionality, and certainly all the kind of nice wrappings, an improved interface are the next step of where we take this to make it, as we've kind of got it as a proof of concept demo project, and so things like that are the next step for where it goes. If people have suggestions for things they would like to see for stuff like that, that kind of feedback is very useful for me when I'm thinking about what I might develop, when I'm building my own feature lists or Trello boards. So please fire it in here in the Slack channel. Send me an email, mike.bennett@ed.ac.uk. Yeah, it's good. I'm always happy to have conversations with people about technology and how these tools can improve and help people in the libraries, people in institutions, people doing work with collections. Very informative. When it reads bleed through print from a Verso page, do you add a particular note after marking it as not an entity? That is a very good question. That is the sort of thing that would also be useful to know purely from my point of view. It probably wouldn't feed back into the project too much, because that indicates there was a problem with the image processing before OCR. So before the images go through the text recognition, I try to clean them up, which means performing some computational tasks on the image to do things such as removing the bleed through so that it doesn't come further down the line. So if there are instances where that's come through, it will be just helpful for me to know on a personal level. Thank you. If you come across a handwritten name or signature, would you add this as an entity, or is the focus only on the printed text? So at the moment for this project, the focus is primarily the printed text, because we're looking at transcribers for the handwritten stuff. But as with all these things, it doesn't hurt if you are transcribing the page and you feel like making a transcription with that and adding a note to say it's handwritten. That's absolutely fine. All data that comes back is good data and can be used to improve things. Once dates are correctly identified, are you planning on adding a feature that will convert them into a standard format? Yeah, so the data undergoes some normalization before we output it. So where entity dates are detected, what we'll actually do is we'll return the raw text, because sometimes dates are written as, you know, June the 3rd, rather than June 3rd. Or, you know, you might find in some things on the 5th day of June in the year 19 whatever. So we take those in, and the idea for the data output was we would present the text alongside a standardized ISO 98081, I think is the ISO thing for date formatting, kind of formatted date code, so that you could use them machine readable. The idea is the output from this comes out in formats which are useful for humans and machines. Because as mentioned yesterday in some of the panels, we can't always know the intentions of the people consuming our data. So if we can support multiple ways of dealing with the data, that's an improvement. What programs do you use to make the images clear from the noise? So I actually have a custom kind of Python script which uses OpenCV image library to do cleanup. So that's based kind of, around the OpenCV library. I think that there's a very old open source version, but certainly things like that, which are an integral part of the pipeline, we'll look to be releasing sort of the full open source workflow, from providing the images through to getting the data out of editor as an open source application. So if you want to kind of catch up with me about image processing techniques and image cleaning techniques, please feel free to like ping me directly on Slack or on Twitter somewhere, and I'm always happy to sort of sit down and yak hard technical nonsense about cleaning up images. Uh, 8601, right, thank you. Yes, it's almost as difficult as remembering RFC numbers. You'll have no life left after we're through with you. I don't know. I live for these kind of things, right? It's you spend your whole life learning to be a developer, and then what do? Go and work for a bank. Like it's much more fun to work on these kind of challenges with people. How can we make your life easier, right? You have this amazing collection, but there's a lot of legwork that's required to make it usable or to make it interesting for research. Let's build the tools to do that, because why wouldn't you? It's fun. Like I don't know, I enjoy it. Like I said yesterday at the start of the talk, I have a hard time saying no to interesting problems, so digital humanities is a good fit. Do you do taxes? No. No, I do not. There is a good question from Virginia Mills in the Slack channel about the capacity to map places that have had name changes over time to a single entity by using notation same as and in the future. Would this approach or linking to authority databases or gazetteers allow a search for current place name to also return search results where historic names were used? Yes, that is a really good question. In line with the talk about wanting to link out to authority records, this is exactly the sort of thing I would be envisaging that being used for, because if gazetteers exist, there's no point rebuilding them for every part of the collection. And so, I would really like to have the system where it's possible to link out entities and find them in the gazetteers, and then ingest that data back in, so that those kind of searches are possible. So if you search for a historic place name or a modern place name, you will get matches for all the variants of that place name as has come from the authority record it's linked to. That I think will provide a very powerful interface for exposing the collection. It's slightly out of the scope of the editor tool beyond doing the linking to the authority, because once the data is generated, it's there, and how you expose that to a search interface is kind of then up to the individual person working with the data after it's come through the tool. But certainly building a system that would enable that to happen is what I'm really keen on. You may have answered this already, Mike, but any plans to link to Geomarkers? So again, with the same kind of thing, we look to build in links to other forms of rich data. What form that quite takes is still undecided. You know, for certain, we'll be looking at things like LC names and VIAF, but we'll probably look at where we might link out to for georeference data, whether that is to geonames or some of the stuff we have at the university already. So we have a copy of DEEP, which is the digital exposition of English place names. And I think we also have a gazetteer of some historic Scottish names, but don't quote me on that. But certainly within the tool, I would be looking from a technical perspective to just build in a framework where you could link to any arbitrary authority source for lookup. So we would just give the ability to say, this is the authority source I want to use for things that come out of this data. Here is its API endpoint to retrieve the data, and then that can sort of drop into the tool. That's the grand pipe dream. That might be a slight, you know, there might be a year or two down the line, but certainly that kind of thinking is where I'm going when I think about the big picture for the tool and what might come from it. Yes, so Anthony, a couple of people have suggested to me that we do a quick demonstration of the full text search. So if people are interested in that, do pipe up in the chat quickly now, and I will share my screen and do a quick kind of walkthrough with people if that's something people are interested in seeing in the last few minutes. Okay, that's a lot of yeses. So let's fire up the screen share and cross some fingers. Now, I need to find out if I can make the Zoom chat. So before I do this, I want to see if I can make the Zoom chat stay. Otherwise, I'm going to lose everybody. Let's have a look. Share screen. Do this. Do I automatically share? Sharing options, advanced. Let's have a look. Give me your screen share. Okay, I think I'm going to lose the chat. So if someone,
Mike, once you share your screen, Mike, you'll have the floating options up at the top, and the chat gets buried into those 3 dots over to the right.
Okay. There we go. Hey, yeah. Thank you. Now I see you all. Right. So yes, this is the search tool. So I mean, this is just kind of a showing off really of things you can do. So here's a good one. We have an example search here, Sir Mackenzie, and we cross our fingers that the thing works. But what you'll find here is that now we're able to match across these kind of wildcard searches. So this here is, you've got Sir Kenneth Mackenzie, you've got a result for Sir George Mackenzie, Sir Roderick Mackenzie. So it's and just to point out that these image snippets are coming real time based on the search. So none of this is pre-generated. This is using the power of IIIF. So in fact, if we look at this image for an example, what you'll see is in the address bar here, we have a IIIF URL that contains kind of the various technical things for making the image snippet. and it's just a cutout from the image. So if I remove this part here that bounds the size of the image, we can actually just turn it straight into the full page that it came from. So we have our Sir George Mackenzie is about here, I think. So this image is generated using IIIF, kind of live from our IIIF server when you make the search query. So yeah, and when you go to view them in the sort of built-in search viewer here, again, this is all coming straight from the server. And when you click it, you can go back and do the highlighting, and this is just generated dynamically by the search service in the background. So yeah, it really allows you to do some deep diving into the collection based on keywords. So as I'm sure that Jim and Lauren will chip in with at some point, one of the searches they use for testing to see whether things are working is kelp, because it's a kind of obscure thing that does crop up. So they say if we find some matches for kelp, we know it's working. But it confused the heck out of me, because after I first put this tool online and passed it through to them and said, just test it's working, I looked in the logs the next morning and there was, 30 searches for kelp. So yeah, there we go.
Mike, can you give us, well, I love the kelp, so we want to stay on that for a while, but can you give us a test of Jamaica?
Jamaica, I can, yeah. So, I can even spell Jamaica, happy days. So yeah, there we go. It just fires straight in. You can find these things for Jamaica. And again, this is just this particular view is just one output. Actually, what the tool delivers behind the scenes is the raw JSON, so you can build your own visualizations on top of the search service. You don't have to have it displayed like this with these little snippets. You can customize it in this interface, so you can control the size of these snippets. So you maybe, instead of just wanting, I'm just showing a few words either side of the match, but you could, using a setting in the software, you can tell it, actually, I want to see the lines, 2 lines either side of the match to deliver it in context. Or indeed, you can go through into the viewer, the full IIIF viewer, with deep zoom browsing through the pages, and you can then go and see the searches not only in the context of the page, but also in the context of the whole volume using this kind of layout here. So you can actually see in this volume, almost all of the responses for Jamaica are right here at the end, and there's a couple scattered throughout, one reference here, but then up here you have, a good sort of 30, 40 pages. So obviously what you have here is a particular case which has a lot of reference to Jamaica. So it really helps with kind of exposing the data.
Mike, I don't know if you've got an example you could show of one of my favorite elements of this is that you can search for something and it shows the different forms of that word as well.
Yeah, so let me see if I can find something that does this. Let's try, I think I used insurance in my talk yesterday. So you can see here that the search for insurance, it does kind of the basic language processing and it stems the word. So it's matching not only the plural insurances, but it's also matching the past tense insured. So this is using kind of fairly standard language processing techniques of stemming in order to kind of convert words into their base forms, which means you can have a sort of richer search through the catalogue. And it allows you for things, if you don't spell something quite right, or if you have a rough idea of the sentence you're looking for, but maybe the words are slightly different, the motive of the sentence is there, then the search matters. Are those conventions hand-coded or linked to a dictionary? So the searching and stemming here is based on Solr. So I'm actually just using the standard Solr English language stem filter factory, and I think the Porter stemmer both of which come with Solr as just base components of the query. So that was one of the reasons for choosing Solr as the backend, is that it has these kind of language tools for full text searching as part of what it does. And also, I should give at this point a very special shout out to Johannes Bater and the team at the Bavarian State Library, because behind all this magic is a fantastic Solr plugin they wrote to allow for indexing and search across Alto documents and OCR transcription. So without that, it wouldn't work. So my undying thanks to them. And I will link to their plugins and to the other things, and I will pass out the link. This particular interface at the minute is internal only, but the tool that powers it is already open source. You can already go and download it from my GitHub and run your own version locally. So I'll post the link to that in just a second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because I'm aware that we are almost at 6 o'clock. So thank you everyone for having a play around. I'll leave the workshop interface up for the next couple of days. So please feel free to kind of keep playing around with it. If you have any questions or suggestions, then fire into me. I'll be there. I'll be monitoring it to make sure it doesn't fall over, etc. And I don't know if Elise is going to step in now with a few last words for the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for this, Mike, and everybody who's stayed on to the end here. We really appreciate it. We've got another day planned tomorrow with some great presentations from external organizations. We've got from the University College London, Aga Khan Library, and the Folger Shakespeare Library in Washington, DC, which we're really looking forward to. We hope you can join us for those, as well as we're starting off the day with a panel on cataloging and making the undiscoverable discoverable. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thanks very much, guys. Bye.